When you look at the Roman Coliseum today, it's so easy to just see an ancient, crumbling ruin, right? Like this romantic relic of a bygone era. But honestly, that is not what this building was. It wasn't some temple for quiet worship or a peaceful palace. We're looking at a massive, incredibly noisy, and perfectly engineered machine. It was an engine of law, commerce, and pure imperial propaganda operating right at the very heart of the Roman Empire. So let's dive into this explainer and discover how this colossal structure actually functioned on a day-to-day basis. Which brings us to a really fascinating paradox. How on earth did a monument that is globally famous for blood, death, and brutal gladiatorial combat actually serve to heal a deeply fractured city? Well, to figure that out, we have to realize that the Colosseum was designed as the ultimate populist gift. Think of it as a strategic architectural band-aid. It was explicitly meant to unite Rome after the disastrous, entirely selfish reign of a tyrant. And that stark political shift is literally built into the ground here. You see, after the Great Fire of Rome, Emperor Nero claimed this enormous tract of burned, ruined land in the center of the city just for himself. He built this disgustingly luxurious golden palace, the Domus Aurea, which even came with its own massive artificial lake. I mean, the absolute ego, right? But when Emperor Vespasian took power, he wanted to send a very clear message. He drained Nero's private, selfish lake and built the Flavian amphitheater right on top of it. He quite literally took a tyrant's private luxury and replaced it with a public arena meant for 50,000 ordinary Roman citizens.
Part 1. Building the Flavian Amphitheater.
Now, erasing a lake and erecting a literal mountain of stone in its place is no small feat. But look at how rapidly this happened. After the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD cleared the land, it took just until 72 AD for Vespasian to drain that lakebed and actually begin construction. And remarkably, just 8 years later, in 80 AD, the Colosseum was officially inaugurated by his son, Emperor Titus, with 100 straight days of games. Transforming a muddy, drained lakebed into a towering stone megastructure in less than a single decade, that is absolutely staggering. To put that scale into perspective, just think about this number. 240,000. That's the estimated number of ox-drawn cartloads of travertine stone that were required to build the Colosseum. And they didn't just find the stones sitting next door. Tens of thousands of laborers and slaves had to drag these massive blocks 20 miles from the Tivoli quarries, down a custom-built road, straight into the heart of Rome. It's just a mind-boggling logistical achievement. So, how did they pull off this rapid build? Roman engineers relied on a few brilliant architectural innovations. First, because they were building on a soft, drained lakebed, they had to pour massive, 12-meter-thick concrete foundations so the whole thing wouldn't sink. Above ground, they used a modular system of interlocking arches and vaults. This was a total game-changer because it meant multiple crews could work on different sections simultaneously, drastically speeding up the whole process. And visually, they stacked 3 tiers of Greek architectural orders right on the facade. You've got Doric on the bottom, Ionic in the middle, and Corinthian on top, creating this highly structured, awe-inspiring exterior.
Part 2. The Ancient Megastadium.
You know, the true genius of the Colosseum isn't just how it was built, it's how it was used. It operated with the crowd control efficiency of a modern-day NFL or Premier League stadium. Take the number 80. That represents the 80 massive entrance arches circling the ground level. Just like stadiums today, 76 of these entrances were numbered. This allowed 50,000 members of the general public to quickly find their assigned seating sectors using a clever ticket system. The remaining 4 entrances? Those were grand, unnumbered gates strictly reserved for the elite, including one VIP entrance specifically for the emperor to slip directly into his private box. And just when you think they thought of absolutely everything, get this. The Colosseum had a retractable roof. Seriously, they deployed something called the velarium, which was this massive canvas awning designed to shade the crowd from that blistering Mediterranean sun. They actually drafted expert sailors from the Roman Navy specifically to operate it. These sailors used complex winches to hoist a central ring, unfurling long strips of fabric from 240 masts mounted at the very, very top of the amphitheater. It was just an absolute marvel of rigging and engineering. Which brings us to a really fascinating question. If this building was a gift for the public, how did the Colosseum simultaneously enforce strict Roman social order? The answer lies in the harsh reality that while everyone was invited to the party, absolutely no one was equal once they stepped inside those walls.
Part 3. Seating the Social Hierarchy.
Moving inside the cavea, that's the massive bowl of the seating area, we can see how the Colosseum literally put every single Roman in their place. Down at Tier 1, right up close to the blood and the action, that was strictly for senators and nobles. Tier 2 was for the equestrian class, basically the knights. Tier 3 was for ordinary Roman citizens. And Tier 4, way up at the very top, sitting on cheap wooden bleachers over 300 feet away from the action, that was reserved for women and slaves. Your social worth in Rome was directly, physically tied to your proximity to the arena floor. So the absolutely crucial point here is that this wasn't just a sports arena. It was a 360-degree theater of control. Because it was a wraparound design, you weren't just watching the gladiators, you were watching society itself. The poor sitting up top could look down and see exactly who held the wealth and the power. Meanwhile, the emperor could look out and gauge the mood of the masses. The audience was very much a part of the spectacle, reinforcing social obedience simply by sitting in their assigned seats. Part 4. The hypogeum, the engine room. Now, to really understand how the spectacles themselves operated, we need to leave those sunny marble seats and descend below the sand into what was essentially the engine room of the Colosseum. This area was called the hypogeum. It was added about a decade after the grand opening by Emperor Domitian, and it was this terrifying two-story underground labyrinth right beneath the wooden arena floor. Think of it as the ultimate backstage area. It was a massive, complex grid of dark corridors, animal cages, and mechanical lifting platforms that made all the magic up above actually happen. 28. That is the incredible number of manual elevators operating in this cramped underground space. Using a really clever system of trapdoors and ramps, hundreds of unseen workers could hoist cages up from the pitch black. It allowed lions, bears, or fully armed gladiators to magically spring out of the sand, completely shocking and delighting the roaring crowd above. But the reality down in the hypogeum was incredibly brutal. While the elite sought in the breezy, perfumed air above, the slaves working the heavy wooden capstans below were trapped. They were in a dark, deafening, and suffocatingly hot environment. Imagine being surrounded by the roars of starving, exotic animals and the relentless, pounding drumbeats signaling exactly when to push the heavy machinery. It was literally a sweat-soaked nightmare fueling the entertainment of the empire. Part 5. Blood, Spectacle, and Control. So what exactly happened on the sand? The spectacles actually followed a very strict daily schedule. Mornings were reserved for the vanitations, these massive exotic beast hunts featuring animals dragged from the absolute furthest edges of the empire. Midday featured brutal public executions. Then the afternoon was the main event, the gladiatorial duels. But incredibly, before that underground hypogeum was built, they held naumachia. They would literally flood the arena floor using channels connected to nearby aqueducts, bring in specially designed ships, and stage lethal, full-scale naval battles right in the middle of Rome. Just let that sink in for a second. Which brings us to the ultimate, cynical purpose behind all this death and engineering. As the famous quote goes, giving the people bread and circuses meant to keeping them calm, united, dependent on the emperor. You see, the Colosseum was the ultimate political tool. By providing free food and these absolutely mind-blowing entertainments, the emperors successfully distracted a massive, volatile, and heavily armed population. It kept them docile, entertained, and fiercely loyal to the state. Part 6. The missing half. However, as we know, empires fall and buildings eventually crumble. The decline of the Colosseum was a really slow and honestly strange process. With the empire going broke and Christianity on the rise, the last gladiator fights ended in the early 5th century. The last recorded beast hunt was a bit later in 523 AD. After that, the building was largely abandoned. Over the centuries, it was repurposed as a fortress, a medieval housing complex, and eventually just a giant stone quarry. But the defining blow? That came in the year 1349 with a massive, catastrophic earthquake. If you visit Rome today, you'll immediately notice the Colosseum looks like a broken shell. So why did only one side fall down? Believe it or not, it all comes back to Nero's lake. The southern wall was built on the softer, spongy soil of that old drained lakebed. So during that 1349 earthquake, the soft soil literally gave way and the entire southern half collapsed into a mountain of rubble. And that rubble was promptly carted away to build Renaissance palaces. The northern wall only survived because it was sitting on solid ground, and later on the popes actively protected that remaining half, using it as this grand dramatic backdrop for their religious processions. Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought. Does a building survive because of the stone it is made of, or the history it represents? The Colosseum has been burned, it's been shaken, plundered, and completely stripped of its gleaming marble. Yet it still stands today as the ultimate symbol of human ambition, engineering genius, and the completely ruthless power of the Roman Empire. It's not just a pile of rocks. It is a permanent, echoing voice of the ancient world. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.